The EIA, which is the Energy Information Administration, published an article in 2008 stating that currently the United States consumes 19.6 million barrels of gasoline daily, which is about 25% of the world's total. Due to this overuse consumption, the U.S. has decided to move their oil frontier to Alaska. In Alaska is the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, which is the ANWR, which sits at the northeastern top of Alaska and contains about 19 million acres. U.S. Geological Survey, which is the USGS, estimated in 2003 that between 5.7 and 16 billion barrels of crude oil is located in the ANWR. Knowing that this pristine place is a wildlife sanctuary, oil lobbyists and the Congress set forth a bill and also passed a bill to allow gasoline companies, such as ExxonMobil, to drill among these areas. This brings me to my main proposition, which is the gasoline companies in Congress should halt all oil drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. The claims supporting my proposition are that 1, oil drilling is causing harm to the local wildlife, 2, oil drilling is causing harm to the environment, and 3, that oil drilling is only able to suffice 9% of the oil dependency of America. My first claim, which is that oil is causing harm to the local animals, is that because nearly 200 species of birds visit and nest on the region's tundra and wetlands. Caribou, musk oxen, wolverines, grizzly, and polar bears roam the vast expanse of the land. These creatures have roamed the far north for centuries, far before men have ever entered Alaska. But now they are facing danger. All across their Arctic home, rapid change is altering their fragile habitat. A good example of this is the ever-diminishing caribou herds, roaming almost all of Alaska and northern Canada, in which about all nests and produces their young in the refuge. Dr. Richard Cameron, who is a field scientist that spent 2 years in the reserve and is still there observed a steady decrease of caribou around the pipelines and foundry stations. Since the caribou use the refuge as a ground for raising their calves, this causes a major concern for their survival. Also noted by Dr. Cameron was that the caribou have a tough time raising their young if they aren't in the reserve, because the reserve produces enough food for the whole herd and it suffices enough food for their calves. Nowhere in Alaska can caribou find enough food to satisfy their needs. This brings me to my next subject, which is the harm to the local environment by the oil foundries, truck and oil lines, and the pumps. Prudhoe Bay, which is another oil drilling site just west of the refuge, shows what could happen to the environment. A testimony by the Energy Information Administration, also the EIA, in 2006 stated that Prudhoe Bay had experienced a total of 103 oil spills along their oil lines and boat shipments. Further on in their testimony, they stated that the environment around the lines were experiencing a decrease in growth, and the effort to fix these situations were minimum. This statement, made by a federal administration under the Bush administration, basically said that they weren't trying to help the environment. Along with oil spills comes with the intervening of humans. The production of truck lines, which are roads, boundaries, oil pumps, airstrips, and the villages for their workers, has created an environment that kills the beauty and flawlessness of the land. Think of it this way. If roads and streets create an unclean and terrible environment, like Pomona, and the ANWR is creating roads and streets, then the ANWR is going to be a clean and terrible environment. My next point states that the oil produced from the ANWR will only suffice 9% of the total oil usage of the U.S. yearly. The EIA published another statement in 2006 that estimates it will take 7 to 12 years to allow permittance to all oil companies in the ANWR, and the earliest it could start drilling is 2010. Assuming an optimistic scenario, which is the best scenario, and the mean expected oil recovery is 16 billion barrels, the environmental advisor, Mark Easton of the EIA, estimates production of 600 million barrels a year. In comparison, the U.S. gasoline census, the USGC, published in 2008 states that U.S. daily consumption is 19.6 million barrels a day, which I said earlier, or 6,752 million barrels a year. Thus, in this scenario, ANWR, once on tap, would provide less than 9% of U.S. annual usage, and that's the best that it can provide. If a less positive scenario, where 5.7 billion barrels was produced, then it would provide a 3% ratio. And since the oil is in multiple places rather than one location, then that means the higher cost of tapping the oil will increase the cost of gas, and which would increase the total amount of gas produced from the oil fields. This proves that the tap of the ANWR should only be used as a federal reserve, only to be used when the crude oil is scarce and the demand is high. In conclusion, the ANWR is a beautiful place filled with pristine mountain ranges to tiny groundhogs. Through the steadily decrease in animals and growth rates, the environment will be sucked in with life. The harm to the environment and the animals alone should stop the entrance of oil companies into the ANWR. But also the statistics prove that it will never come close to providing enough oil to satisfy our ongoing use for oil. This is why the oil companies should leave the ANWR.